Good afternoon, and welcome to our October 25th, 2021 Tuesdays for Teachers. I'm Debbie Fawcett with GED Testing Service, and as you can tell, I don't have the most pleasing stage voice for today. So I just wanted to say welcome to you all. And a couple of things before we get started. I'm going to ask my colleague, Susan Pittman, to take over so that you don't have to struggle with this voice for today, but to let you know that we are so happy to have you with us. Susan, help me out here.
Okay, Debbie, I will, and go and be silent for a while. So we're glad to have all of you with us today as we start a really special series of webinars that will be continuing on into 2022. But before we get started and before I introduce everyone, just a couple of things that I want to do first. And as you notice that each of you have a dashboard, a control panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen. You can notice that we have highlighted on this slide a couple of different things for you. One, we have the audio. So if for some reason, while we're going through this, you have some difficulty and all of a sudden you can't hear us, you can always go into that little function and you could switch over and actually do it as a phone call. So there are a number of things that you can work in with that. The other thing is that throughout the webinar, if you have questions, if you'll notice that there is a question box, if you'll continue down looking at your control panel, and you'll see that over to the side, there's actually a little box with an arrow sticking out of it. If you click on that, the question box will open up and you can see all the different questions that are there, but also it gives you a little bit better space to write. Otherwise, you can just put your question right into that one. We will be monitoring questions throughout the webinar. So if there's some things that pop in and they look like we need to talk about those right at that particular moment, then we will do that throughout the presentation. The other thing is you should notice if you go a little further down that there are 4 handouts. It says handouts 4 next to it, and all you have to do is open up that box, click on the little arrow pointing to the side, and you'll see that there are 4 documents. And you can open up those and download those to your own computer as we're going through with this. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. On probably by the end of this week, Tico, who is our grand master out there, who's taking care of everything for us from a technology standpoint, Tico will be posting the video and these handouts as well as today's PowerPoint on the GED.com website. She'll be putting those into the Tuesdays for Teachers webinar archives. So you'll be able to go back and pull those materials if you don't do it today during the webinar itself. One other thing, many of you want to have a certificate that showed you attended. So if you go into the archive and go to this particular webinar, you'll be able to download a certificate of attendance, you sign it and then turn it in to the appropriate person and within your institution itself. So keep those things in mind. Yes, we are recording and all of this will be available on the GED.com website under the professional development resources. So, and all of the webinars are there as we're going through. So having said that, I'm going to introduce a few people. You heard Debbie with her very interesting voice today. You know, at least she doesn't sound like Kermit the Frog, but anyhow, Debbie has been working with me on Tuesdays for Teachers. We have been doing this for 7 years now. And you know her as a senior director with the GED testing service. But today we are very pleased to have 2 very special people with us. Cheryl Clark Trim is actually the manager of test development So yes, she's got lots of answers for all those questions about test development. And then we have Michael Bell. Michael is with us as the Senior Content Specialist, focusing in on math. So he's going to take you through all these different pieces of where students are showing some skill gaps and some knowledge challenges as we go through. All, of course, designed to make sure that as we move through the process, that we're able to make sure we're covering those things that students really need for us to do. And so having said that, I'm going to turn it over, and Cheryl, if you would like to say a few words before Michael starts, you feel free to do so, or Michael, it will be up to you.
I would just like to say thank you all for attending. We have some great information for you. Michael is very knowledgeable. And Michael, why don't you go ahead and get started?
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everybody. As you heard, my name is Michael Bell. I'm the Senior Content Specialist for Mathematics on GED. I've been here almost 10 years, so I've almost got a handle on everything mathematical to do with the GED. Every time I think I've got it, I learn something new. What we're going to talk about today is here in today's focus, I should say, is that we have discovered that there are test takers and students with gaps in their knowledge and skills, and it's impacting their ability to pass the GED math test. Officially, it's called the Mathematical Reasoning Test. I will probably just call it the math test from here on in. Some of these gaps are in areas that are a bit confusing. They're in places where we wouldn't necessarily expect gaps to exist. So we're going to cover some of those areas, let you know what they are, both today and in November. And your test takers and your students, they may need a little more coverage in those areas, a little more practice. So we're going to go over those areas, and hopefully this information will be helpful to you as you seek to help your students. Oh, too far. Someone's leaning on the accelerator.
I apologize, but
more.
for some reason mine decided to go very fast through everything. So, okay, I have us back to where we need to be. So, Michael, my apologies.
That's okay. I believe it's a legal requirement for there to be at least one small technical glitch during a presentation. So we're good now. Here are the 4 areas we'll be covering today. We're going to talk a little bit about how we develop items and tests. We're going to talk about how we identified those skill and knowledge gaps. We're going to talk about the specific skills and GED indicators where students and test takers seem to have the most difficulty, where you may get the most bang for your buck in terms of instructional practice. And where we have an idea, because we don't always, we're going to talk about possible reasons why students and test takers are having difficulty, or at least telling you what the errors that we're seeing are. My guess is that 99% of you are likely seeing these exact same errors in your classrooms, but we'll have to see. I do want to call out the one word in that 3rd bullet, indicators. That is part of our assessment target framework, which, as Susan, oh, I'm not sure what's in the comparison chart. I did not, anyway, the assessment framework is available on GED.com, and it tells you what skills and knowledge are required for the math test. Yes, and it's in that comparison chart that is posted in the handouts. I just pulled it up to make sure. Okay. Oop. I think your keyboard might be having a little problem. Mine was doing that earlier. Okay. There's a couple things we won't be covering, and as I'm sure you all know, being educators, some concepts are just more difficult. Quadratic equations, permutations are two of the examples we see. We expect test takers to not do as well on those items, not because the items are harder, but because the concepts are harder. So again, we're not going to be telling you, giving you the magic formula for getting all your students to do perfectly on quadratic equations, because that magic formula just doesn't exist. Next, please. Okay. One of the things that we do, well, we have a set of guiding principles when we develop items. These are long tested in scientific theory. They are industry standard. And usually I don't read a PowerPoint because that's just boring, but I am going to go through this a little more closely. The first bullet, when it says one item, one construct, what that means is we're only assessing one concept from the assessment framework, one skill. For example, basic computation and percentage are in separate indicators. They're considered separate skills, even though some of the computation concepts are part of percentage. So we do not, when we write a test item, we do not include both of those, just one. We wouldn't have, because that way, well, if we didn't, then we wouldn't know which part the students and test takers didn't understand, which part they needed help with. The test is essentially a way to provide information to GED Testing Service, as well as an opportunity for your test takers to obtain that certificate. So if one item, one construct means we are only assessing one thing at a time so that we're sure of the data that we're getting. The second bullet, no extraneous numbers. We don't put numbers in test items just to have extra numbers, just to make it harder for the test takers to figure out which numbers they need. Yes, in word problems and in other items, reading is an important part. Parsing the mathematics is an important part of solving the item, but we're not trying to make this a reading test. We're not trying to put in extra information that's not part of what we're looking for in terms of information that we can get from the test takers. It just makes the item harder and it doesn't serve a purpose. So we don't do it. On the multiple choice items, the distractors, which is our fancy industry term for wrong answers, reflect common mistakes, and usually it's going to be the most common mistakes. So the things that you see in your classroom when your students practice or turn in homework, those mistakes, those misunderstandings, those are also going to be reflected in the item, because again, it gives us better information on how to develop the items, how to build a better test, how to better serve the test takers. I include this last one because we occasionally get people who accuse us of putting trick questions on the test. And I don't mind the accusation, but I do want to reassure everybody, we do not put trick questions on the test for basically the same reasons that I outlined for the other 3 bullet points. A trick question does not serve our testing population. It does not provide good data for us. There is no point on either end for having a trick question on the test. It might be difficult. It might require a bit more reading than some items or some of your students might be used to or comfortable with, but we do not do trick questions. And then the last one is we do not test solution methods, at least not start to finish. One of the beauties of mathematics, and I've been in mathematical education almost 30 years, and one of the things I've always appreciated so much about it is that so often there is more than one way to solve a problem. And so again, it's not about whether a test taker solves an item the quote unquote right way, and you can't see me making air quotes, but that's what I'm doing. It's about, do they understand the concepts and can they get to that solution in a way that makes sense to them? Next slide, please, Susan.
Michael, before you move on to the next slide, I just want to say, number one, thank you for going through those guiding principles. But the other thing is the emphasis on not testing solution methods, because I think many of us who are out there, we're not math majors. And yes, we have ways of coming up with answers. We may approach a problem one way or another. There's so many different ways that you can do that given the different types of problems. And I really wanted to thank you for emphasizing that particular point, because I think it makes a huge difference for our teachers out there to feel comfortable in, as they're teaching, that they're not forced into one way of teaching something as well.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And absolutely. Thank you, Susan. And as a former teacher, I'm slightly ashamed that I didn't think of that because of the target audience as educators. There's not always going to be one way or one best way to teach a concept. So thank you. All right, once we develop our items, we need to get field test data. Most of you are probably familiar with field test. It's basically a trial item that's embedded in an operational item, quote, real tests, the ones where the scores count. And we collect data on that field test item because, as it says in that first line, once an item is perfect, we think it's perfect, but the real test comes when the students are actually, and the test takers are actually trying the item, and sometimes we find out that it may not be as perfect as we thought. The SAT also embeds field test items in the real test. We don't do too many at once because we don't want to take away from the time that student test takers have. But it is the only way to get real data and basically, excuse me, to get real data and make sure that the test item is going to work the way it is supposed to, and we expect it to, once we put it on an operational test where the scores will count towards whether the test takers get a certificate or not. And we have to have enough test takers take each item. And so what we do is we build small pools, and then once every item in that pool has been seen by enough, we swap it out for another one. There's a lot of technological stuff that goes on with that, but that is just so far out of my comfort zone. I'm a Neo-Luddite, and I just really, I just accept that it works, that part works. Next, please. There we go. Okay. Once the items have been taken, they are analyzed statistically and for content issues. Remember when I had that asterisk when I said once the item is perfect, it's possible we miss something. And if that happens, then the item is probably going to fall into that third, well, it'll fall into either that second category or that third category. The first one is the item is accepted. It wasn't too hard, it wasn't too easy. It assessed what we wanted it to assess, whether that was equations, geometric measurement, statistics, what have you. If an item has a few problems that we can fix, then we'll put it in the revised and field tested pool, which means we can fix this and we'll give it another go. Sometimes though, and this happens rarely, but we're not perfect, we find an item that is just not working, or we missed something big, like we meant to say 12 and it said 21 and nobody missed it. Okay, that's not a very good example because we have a lot better controls than that, but I'm having a hard time coming up with a reason why we reject items just for content, mostly because it's just too problematic to fix it. And as I was talking about earlier, this statistical analysis is where we got the knowledge and the skill gaps. We look at all the indicators, all the skills we're assessing, and some of them, like quadratic equations, the items are hard. We expect that. Some of the skills, the items are easy, and we expect that. But some of them, they're not doing quite as well as we have come to expect from past tests. And so that's where, and so because this is all coming from student achievement and answers on questions, the conclusion is they have gaps in their knowledge that we can target, and we can point out to you so that you can help target them as well. We're going to get into the specific gaps on the next slide, but Susan, did you have anything? Oh, there we go. Thank you. This is the one I was going too fast. In today's session, we're going to talk about 3 areas of interest: non-calculator items, exponents and roots, and 3-dimensional shapes. Session 2, we're going to cover 4 more areas. And please note that there is some overlap between some of these areas. And in fact, the first 2 bullets that we're going to look at, there is some overlap. Items will fall into both those categories. So Susan, before I move on, were there any questions or comments that you wanted to address or make?
I think at this point, everybody is just taking in all the information. What we're hearing from a lot of people at this point is that this is exactly what they were hoping to learn, that they really wanted to see this. And so we do have one question. Does the GED Ready practice test get updated when the test itself is updated? And the reason this person is asking is that Ready test seems to score higher than the actual. So do some of these items that you develop and go through all this process, they can appear on either or, correct? They can appear on the GED Ready or on the operational test.
That is correct.
They can, but they'll only appear on one of them. The GED Ready practice test does not get updated as often as the operational test. And I don't know what this, I don't know what the schedule is. And I don't know if Cheryl has any further information she can impart on that. But
Yes.
the short answer is no. It does not get updated every time.
Right, so I want to make a distinction here. So all of the items on both the GED test and the GED practice test have all been through the same process. They're all scaled, and they're all psychometrically validated. So we're not changing the way we do things on the GED test and leaving the practice test behind. They're both still connected psychometrically. So I can't explain why some people do better on the practice test than they do on the regular test, other than it's just a subset of questions, and it is a predictor, and it is a psychometrically valid predictor of how well you will do. But I personally do much better on practice tests than I do on an actual test, because I'm much more nervous on an actual test. And on a practice test, I can take my time, so that may have something to do with it. But it is a valid predictor, and we don't make wholesale changes at all in the way that we're doing things. And Michael did a really good job of explaining, the construct, and we're keeping things very level. We're not making huge changes or anything within the test. We're still testing the same concepts, the same skills. I'm not sure if that helps any with that response.
Well, I think, Cheryl, that your comment that you just made in terms of, we are not under the kind of pressure when we have a high stakes test. When you're taking the operational test itself, number one, it's longer, but also there's so much at stake for many of the students that are there. So that can be a problem that they have as well. And so, yes, there can be some differences, but basically, I think the really important thing for everyone to know is that there is no difference in the questions, the same types of questions. They're developed. There's just a bucket of questions, and whether they end up on Ready or they end up on the operational test is up to fate. But those are the kinds of things that I think it's important for us to talk with our students about as they go into the operational test, to make sure that they're more comfortable as they're going into that and working through there. So yes, you may see some differences, but I would think that a good portion of that does come back to the pressure on students at that point. Debbie, I thought I saw you on mute for a minute. Was there something you wanted to add?
No, I think you've added it. I think there's so many unknown factors, not just the content, and I think you've addressed it, that we know readiness for a test on any given day, plus the test nervousness factor, have a lot to do with why you see some scores that are a little bit higher on the Ready than they are on the regular test. So I think we've got that one. We can move on.
Okay, so Michael, let's talk non-calculator items.
Let's. One of the things that we look at when we do our statistical analysis of items is we look at each item in the context of how did the high achieving test takers do, the middle, the low achieving, and those in the middle. And by that we mean those, based on their score on the actual test, those who did really well, those not so well, and those towards the bottom. Usually on an item, we would expect to see a lot of difference. We would expect to see the high achievers doing much better on the item than the middle achievers, who we also would expect to do much better than the low achieving groups. But we're not seeing that, and not just on one or two items, but for a lot of these items. We looked at a lot of items before we came to this presentation, and we did a lot of internal work to, really make sure that are these the gaps that we're seeing? Are these the unexpected results that we're seeing? Now, unfortunately, since we don't have a lot of insight into the classroom, we're not 100% sure why, but based on some anecdotal evidence, one reason may be due to over-reliance in the classroom. Not all the classrooms. And also this includes test takers who don't attend an adult ed program. So, when we say test takers, we're not just talking about the students in your classroom or all the students in the classrooms of all the people on this webinar. We're talking about everybody who takes the GED. So maybe you're already all over this like a cheap suit, and your students don't get to use calculators when they're practicing those non-calculator items. If that's the case, great. But, and I'm not saying you shouldn't allow a calculator, at least until they're comfortable, but when they they're going to be on the test 5 items. The first 5 items they're not going to be allowed a calculator. So if they've been working on these concepts and skills with a calculator, and then they walk in and there's no calculator, that can throw them off right away. So that's one possible reason. You're all educators. I was an educator. My mom was an educator. My wife's an educator. So I have great respect for educators, and I would not be surprised if we open this up to, everybody speaking. There would be a lot of other really good ideas about why they're not doing as well on non-calculator items, and they would probably all be correct. So just because I don't know why it's happening and just have a theory doesn't mean that it's the correct theory. So if this, your students, you're going to have a good idea of why they're not doing as well, or why the GED in general, they're not doing as well on these items. For your information, there are 8 indicators, and when you look on the one handout, they will be the first 8 in the math portion, and they're Q1A through Q1D, which covers number sense, and Q2A through Q2D, which covers arithmetic computation. And I've listed a bunch of very granular finite skills in there, and you'll see that when if you choose to read the framework. It does not include Q2E, that's the cutoff. That's arithmetic word problems. Those we allow a calculator on. So once you get past these first 8, everything else, they're allowed a calculator on a test. Okay, next please. I'm just going to throw some examples at you. These aren't fully formed examples because they're obviously missing the 4 answer choices if this was a real multiple choice item. But this is basically the kind of questions that we are asking. And underneath each one, you'll see in parentheses the indicator that that item assesses. So for the first one, they're placing 3 fractions in order from least to greatest. Obviously, they're going to need to find common denominator before they can do that. On the second one, what is the least common multiple of 3, 8, and 10? This one's a perfect example of what Susan said earlier about more than one way to teach it. I myself used to teach middle school and high school, and when I was teaching middle school, I must have taught multiples and factors at least 4 different ways so that students could choose the way that they were most comfortable with. The next one is simplifying an exponential expression, and they will have to use the laws of exponents to do that. And that's Q1C. Next slide, please. Q2A. This is another one where we also have fill. I'm sorry, I meant to indicate that this one was intended as a fill in the blank item, which we have a few of. And this would be entered as a decimal, but they could do this one of two ways: convert the fraction to a decimal and then multiply, or the decimal to a fraction and then multiply, or they could, of course, they'd have to convert it afterwards. The second item is order of operations, which those are both those first two are Q2A, which covers basic computation, no word problems, just, what you'd see on a worksheet with 100 items, for instance. And then the last one involves cube roots. Hopefully the 3 inside the root symbol is coming through, and everybody can see it. We do cover square roots and cube roots. And as you can see, Gap 1 covers a lot of skills. And we're pretty much seeing lower than expected achievement more or less across the board. Adding whole numbers, we don't do a whole lot of just because it's a little too easy, but most of the other things that you're seeing are the kind of items that that the test takers, your students, are going to see on the GED. And again, I'm reminded of the old joke about how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice. And it's unfortunate that I don't have a magic bullet for you, and that this is such a wide range of skills, but that's pretty much the situation that we're seeing from test taker data. Okay, next, please. Okay, exponents and roots. This is Gap 2. You can see I've included the specific indicators. Q1C, which is laws of exponents, Q2C, which is cubes and cube roots. I actually probably should have put that third bullet right underneath. Squares and square roots. Test takers are mostly fine with this indicator, but they struggle a bit with squaring negatives, so we are going to address that. But those are the specific indicators that assess exponents and roots in and of themselves. Now, there are related indicators where where calculating with exponents or calculating with roots or both is required, but it's not the main thrust of the skill. For example, Q4 and Q5, which are measurement of 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional shapes, respectively, including Q4A, the Pythagorean theorem, those all involve formulas that have roots in them. So if they're going to apply, if a test taker is going to apply those formulas, they're going to need to understand how roots and exponents work. There are some algebraic indicators, A1D through F and A1I. Those all involve exponents. Not every item, I should clarify, but it is part of it. And A7C and D, which involve quadratic functions. So even though that's, again, the gist of those is not just roots or just exponents, it's something they need to know if they're going to succeed on items that are assessing these indicators. So if they can get the basics down that are in Q1C, 2B, and 2C, that will help them immensely with the others. Next, please. So again, here are some examples. The first two are pretty much cribbed from the last gap because they are both non-calculator items and they both involve exponents and roots. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that second item, -3 times the cube root of 64. We don't just do multiplication, we don't just do finding the cube root of a number, like cube root of 64. We also involve computations with it. So taking that cube root of 64 and multiplying it by 3, or dividing by another number, or adding it with another cube root. So they need to know how to do the cube root part, and they also need to take that and apply that skill with other computations. So it's not just 2 to the 6th power square root of 64. There's more involved in it than that. And that's why I chose, these are kind of some of the harder items that they would see. But I wanted to include them so that you all see that it's not just the simplest, easiest application of those skills. All right, I mentioned on the last slide that they sometimes have problems squaring negatives. There is a difference between -6 squared with and without parentheses. And that is the one place where they seem to have problems with squares and square roots. So I'm going to explain that a little bit on the next slide. Thank you, Susan. We all know, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, maybe you have a better acronym. I've heard many. This is the one that I grew up with, so it's the one I always remember. When you have the 6 in parentheses and the square, and you're squaring it, that basically means the squaring of -6. When you don't have the parentheses, that's when PEMDAS kicks in and you have to square because the negative is equivalent to subtracting. I'm sure that 99% of you, if not 100% of you, already know this, but because it's the one thing we see in GAP 2 that relates to square roots, I wanted to make sure that we cover it because I have gotten emails saying that these are the same thing, and I'm afraid that it just isn't. Okay, next one. Oh, I think you went a little, you're going the wrong way. Okay.
Okay, so my
you're going
computer
to-
is doing some really interesting things. So I will get us back to where we need to be. And that is on slide 19. Yes, there we are. Thank
Okay.
you.
Not a problem. All right. Here we have a basic Pythagorean theorem problem. And because the formula includes squaring, the test takers and your students need to know how to square those numbers once they put them into the formula, and how to deal with that in the case of maybe we give them B and C, which we didn't do here, and they have to take the square root. So it's, again, if they don't know how to do squares, if they don't know how to do square roots, they're likely not going to succeed at an item where they have to use the Pythagorean theorem formula. Next, please. Okay. Here are two geometric measurement items. You can, both times I've given the formula, which you all know. And by the way, in case this hasn't come up in one of the tests for Tuesdays for Teachers, all the necessary formulas are provided on the formula sheet. And I can't remember, was that one of the ones? No, okay. The formula sheet is on the GED website. If we ask them to use a formula that's not on that formula sheet, we will give it to them in the item. We do not want test takers focusing on memorizing formulas, because then they're not focusing on the mathematics. So in both of these cases, there's a square, and they're going to have to, again, they're going to have to know it. This is why this was included in the related indicators. Squaring that radius is not the main focus of these items, but it is absolutely necessary to understand how squaring works, or they're not going to get it right. If we had a sphere where they had to take they have to cube the radius in order to find the volume, again, same thing. They have to know how to cube, or they're not going to get the item right, even though cubing is not the main focus. Next, please. Okay, here's some algebraic computation and evaluation. In that first example, they don't really have to do anything with those exponents except combine the like terms, so that they get 4x squared minus 2y squared. But when they don't understand the laws of exponents, when you have to add and when you have to subtract and when you have to multiply, we see them adding the exponents even though they're not supposed to. 3x to the 4th power minus 2y to the 4th power. So again, it's not the main focus, but if they don't understand how exponents work for numbers, we see them carrying that misunderstanding forward to algebraic computation as well. And the same thing with the second item, where they have to substitute and then calculate, which is actually a lot like the formulas we just saw for geometric measurement. If they don't know how to square, they're not going to get it right. And same thing for the last two items. If they don't understand how the laws of exponents work, if they don't understand when they're supposed to take that shortcut that I'm sure most, if not all of us, are teaching about when you add the exponents, then they're not going to get this right. It'll come out 3x to the 9th power instead of the 6th power, or some other mistake. They'll get the coefficients, but they may not get the exponents. And again, that goes back to that Q1C, understanding the laws of exponents for numbers, so that you can also apply that rule to variables. Next, please.
Michael, this is Debbie. Let me interject a couple of questions here that I think you can answer. As you're talking about the exponents and roots, they are talking about, a question came in, would these be non-calculator questions?
These right here, no.
Yeah, they would, that's what I thought. Some would be,
Yeah.
some would not be, correct? Referring to exponents.
Yeah, the indicators that I listed in GAP 1, Q1, they all start with Q, which stands for quantitative indicators, which is a fancy way of saying number, of course. All the algebraic indicators, a calculator is allowed, but it's not, they really wouldn't, if they don't know how to put in the numbers and calculate, then having the calculator isn't going to help them. They still have to have that knowledge, skill of order of operations, how to square,
Right.
how to put
And
in
I think that was primarily the question. I think that was primarily the question, that this is a skill that may be needed in the first part where they're not using a calculator for some type of exponent questions. And then in other parts of the test, they may still see exponents and roots. And the other one was, are these type of volume questions asked in basic terms like this that you have expressed here on the slide, or is finding volume embedded in a word problem, say describing a pool, etc.?
Both.
Both.
Excellent
And that's
question.
what I thought. Thank you. Before I wrote both, I was going to double check, and I'm going to go back on mute, and I'm going to give us all a time check. We have 20 slides and 35 minutes. Thank you. You're doing a great job. I'm on mute.
Okay, and Michael, just one comment that I'd like to make at this point, and I think this one comes back to maybe kind of a bias I have at this point, but it just seems to me that in the classroom, we need to spend time on those calculator prohibited indicators, because they're going to pay off for us in so many other places.
Absolutely. And that's why I structured this presentation the way I did, to show that it, exactly what you said, Susan, and exactly what I'm sure these educators are very much aware of, is that just like foreshadowing in the Stephen King book, the things we saw at the start are going to keep coming up over and over and over, even if it's not the main focus. So.
Okay,
All
thank
right.
you.
GAP 3 is three-dimensional shapes, and it's Q5A through Q5F, which is basically all of Q5. And there are three basic things or skills that test takers are asked to demonstrate: calculating surface area, calculating volume, and determining the dimensions of a shape, or one dimension, given either the surface area or the volume. So if we give them the volume of a prism and the length and the height, they need to find the width. There's a list here of all the figures that are assessed. If you don't see it here, it's not going to be on the test. Composite figures basically means like a pyramid and a prism stuck together, for whatever reason. I've also seen them called compound figures. So, I just want to make sure we're all good on the terminology. And my last point, as I said before, we give them all the formulas. Next, please. Okay. So here again, well, we're on three-dimensional shapes. So basically, I made these, and this is going back to the question you asked about word problems. We would also have word problems for these, which actually we had before. So I just didn't include them here for space and time issues. But you know, we could easily write a question, an item about, you know, a coffee can for whatever reason. It would have to be realistic, of course. We don't just make up context for the sake of asking an item. It has to be something that has an actual real world application, which is fun because when I'm developing items, I sometimes learn things I did not know before just when I'm researching items. And it's like, huh, I did not know that's how they made tin cans or what have you. Now, again, this goes back to not just the exponents, because every three-dimensional shape, with the exception of the rectangular prism, is going to have an exponent in it, but they also make other mistakes, especially when they get to, well, we'll get to that on the next slide. Just in applying formulas, beyond knowing how to put in 12, well, in this case, it's diameter, because we do ask questions sometimes with diameter, and although mostly we just give them the radius. But just knowing that, okay, you have to take half of that is 6 is the radius and put it in, and then knowing how to do order of operations, how to apply a formula, how to evaluate a formula, I should say. They don't do as well with that as we would expect. And again, this goes back to, this is not me speaking, this goes back to the statistical analysis that we do. So these are just a couple of examples: surface area of a sphere, volume of a cylinder. Next one, Susan. And then this is what I was talking about when I said we asked them for a dimension. We go back the other way. We give them the surface area of that sphere, and they have to substitute that in for the surface area, and then kind of work backwards, like solving an equation to find the radius. Same thing for the cylinder. We give them that volume, we give them the height, and then we ask them to find the radius. On that one, we could also go the other way. We could give them the radius and ask for the height. We have to give everything but basically one missing quantity. So these are the kinds of items that you're going to see, and your test takers are going to see, I should say, your students, for three-dimensional shapes. Next, Susan.
And Michael, what I would say from this one is, this is similar to looking at how students even struggled with doing two-dimensional shapes. And if they were asked to find an area of something, they were okay. But if they were asked to come back and find the length and given the area, and they couldn't do it. You know, so we need to, as teachers, we need to be thinking in that same realm in terms of how we can help our students really parse out what this means and really understand the concept of this and what that surface area and that formula really is.
Yep. Okay, and as I suspected, that was my last slide. And Susan, taking you the rest of the way. Susan, Debbie, well, maybe not Debbie, save your voice, or Cheryl, any other comments or questions or issues you want me to address at this before I hand it off to Susan?
I think we have answered all of the questions related to the one like Susan just answered. Somebody did ask how many items are on the mathematical reasoning test, and there are 42, generally 42 items.
And actually,
Yes.
what we say is there is a general number of items, but it can vary from test form to test form as we understood it, because of the same concepts are tested on each form, but the way the questions are asked, whether there is a 1 or a 2-part answer, is the issue that you would want to keep in mind in the number of test items. We don't want people counting and looking for a certain number of test items because they don't understand that you may have one test question that may count for 2 answers because of the way we've asked them to respond. So I don't want us to get too hung up on knowing how many test items are on a particular test.
The one thing I do want them to be, though, aware of is that those first 5 items, because, you know, that can make or break a student going through. When you think about the skills that they're bringing from that, it is so important as they're going through. And Michael, I just have to say, I have an incredible good feeling from what you've been able to tell us, because it makes things so much clearer to understand the different components that we're dealing with and where students truly are having difficulty. I mean, I know we're not through everything yet. We have the November session where we're going to look, you know, in part 2, but to really have that understanding, to be able to go back and work with students and make sure that, you know, if there are gaps, we help those students fill those gaps. And so we really appreciate what you've done. And I know there are going to be questions that'll keep popping in. And so what I'm going to do very quickly is just, I'm going to give a reminder to everybody. You have incredible resources on the GED.com website. And some of those resources we have given you here, you can actually download them from this, they'll be included. And Michael, I'm not sure where my brain was when I didn't include the formula sheet as one of those, because that is such an important thing as you're working with everyone, you know, and working with students. But just as a couple reminders to everyone, please make sure that you take advantage of these different resources that are on the GED.com website. The computer tutorial, it's so important because under section 4 of that, you have math resources and students need to be aware of those. It's great practice and students can use it as many times as they want to. The other thing is that you have a calculator tutorial. So we want to make sure that our students are accessing that and that they can work with that calculator and be very comfortable. And please remember that these resources are available in English and Spanish. We included here the calculator sheet. It is one of those things you can download from the handouts that we have here, but you can go on GED.com, you can download that as well. And we've given you links so you know exactly where these different pieces are. The formula page, that is so, that we need to make sure our students know these formula, understand how to use these formulas. I'm not talking about anybody memorizing them, because Lord knows I couldn't go back and memorize all these different things, but I want to make sure that it's not something that I encounter a problem and I'm trying to think, well, what do I really need to do? What formula do I need for that? I want to make sure I'm comfortable with all that so you can see the different pieces that are included there. The other thing that's available, and you know, this is one that our students always want something that, you know, they can take and study. And so here's the math study guide. And it has sample questions that are answered so students can actually go through and they can see the types of things that they may encounter along the way. So that's a great resource. And then there's one more, and it's called Calculator Prohibited Indicators. And this one is not right now on the GED website, but if you, first of all, you can download it from what we have here within the handouts. It will be on the archives. And, you know, if you want to have it on the actual GED website, then, you know, make sure you let them know at GED.com, help@GED.com, or within marketing itself with Eliza Wong, because this is something that just as Michael went through and outlined these different components, he's given recommendations for the test takers. There is such important information that's included here. And as I've said before, this is one of my favorite resources that I use. Now, a couple of other things, and we'll go back to questions. These are some just instructional resources. They're free. You can go, well, IXL Learning, you can have, there's some free parts to it, but also if you have a complete program, you have to purchase there. But these are some things, because someone brought up in the questions, we need more practice within certain areas. So Florida Literacy has put together with CrowdEd, they actually have video math prep for the GED. It's free. And it has a lot of different resources that go along with it. Your students can access it on their phones, which is wonderful. And this is just a little portion of the types of things that are included that you can access through that app. So lots of videos and lots of ways for students to go through and work with that. Effortless Math is another site. Now, again, there's worksheets, there are answer keys, which is great because so many of us are like, oh gosh, can we find the answer keys? But these give you skills and practice. That's really what these are designed for. They're not teaching tools, you do that, but they're practice items that students can do, and those are all worksheets. Then you have the IXL Learning, which has so much information. It has content for math, K through 12, and then a lot of other areas as well. So you may want to check that out, or you may have a program where they actually have the subscription service. GED Math Crash Course, another great free resource, and this one has actually been developed by a GED teacher, Kate Redmond, out of Arizona, is the one who has set up this website, and she's done a fantastic job of providing resources, practice problems for GED student. And then one of my favorite ones is actually Math is Fun. And this is out of the UK, so you'll see on their link, it actually says Maths is Fun. Tremendous resources in terms of geometry, really all different areas, but something that I think you'll find very worthwhile to use. Then, if you want something interactive, this is for if you're working with students with surface area. This is out of Alberta, Canada, and students can actually work with nets in order to really learn how to find surface area. Remember, we were talking about different ways of doing things and how you can work with that. So, but this has animations, which our students can always appreciate. Then from there, Michael and Cheryl will be back with us November the 16th, because we're going to have Mathematical Reasoning Part 2 coming up, and that was all those different indicators that Michael had talked about earlier. And then we have the different dates listed as we move on into 2022. So having said that, this is something, I love this graphic for a lot of different reasons. People think that success just this straight line. But really it gets a little messy every now and then. And what we're trying to do within all of this is make sure that as we're working with students, that we help them work their way through all those little squiggles that are out there and the different turns that they take when it comes to math. And I think after today's session, we have a lot of information we can use on that. So having said that, Debbie, where are we in terms of our questions?
Well, I think I just have one question that I would like to pitch back to Michael. If you could address this for us. Someone wrote a question in that said, are commas and decimals presented the same way in the English and Spanish version of the math test?
Well, that's a good question, and I know it's a good question because I don't know the answer.
Ah.
It's been a while since I know that we have people who speak Spanish. I only speak French and English, so that's a very useful skill. But I know that we have people who are hired specifically to address those kind of issues. We contract with a translation vendor, and so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a comma or if it's supposed to be a decimal. But I do know that we have multiple. We have the translation vendor, and then we have someone in-house go over and check their work. I'm usually included in the discussions on, is it supposed to be this way? Is it supposed to be that way? Even though I really don't have anything to contribute.
Okay.
So,
and Michael, I think these things do come up. I think it's an issue for Carolyn. If you would email us either at help@GED, I think we need to ask for a little more clarification from you, because we do know that the test does follow Spanish language conventions, but with a little more clarification, we will get the answer for you from the people that Michael just described, who can tell us exactly a response for you. So we do want to answer your question, but I think you may have to address that to us a little more directly.
And the other thing is, Shauna, friend, I really want to thank you for reminding that ck12.org also now has free online math textbooks for adult learners. That's a great resource as well. They've done fantastic work out there. So thank you for reminding us of that.
And at this point, unless Cheryl sees something I don't see, I think we've pretty well answered the questions, Susan, because you know how this voice sounds. And folks, I apologize. I know it's very hard to listen to this kind of voice. As usual, we get all the same questions about, where do I download the certificate? Will I get a copy of this, etc. So Susan, if you would mind refreshing this, and we'll keep watching to see if anybody else wants to post any more questions.
Sure. Okay, so just everybody is aware. I'm going to, in fact, what I'll do is I'm going to take down this, and I'm going to go out actually to the GED website. So bear with me just a second. And what you're seeing at this point in time is you're seeing GED.com. So for all of you who are interested in going out and pulling all these resources, go into educators and administrators. You don't need to sign in, you don't need to log in, you don't have to do any of that. Just click on that blue button up there. And when you come into that, you're actually going to see over to the left, you see professional development training, and view the resources. Tico will take everything that we have here today, plus the recording, the materials, and she will, in the next couple of days, load that in here. It will actually pop up as the very first of these because she shows them in order. So what you're going to see is Watch Now, and that will have today's recording. You will have the PowerPoint and all of the resources. Now, in this case, you're going to see 5 or 6 of those that are sitting there, and you'll be able to download each one. And then there will also be a certificate. And all you have to do is click on the link, and that certificate will open up. It gives you the date, the name of the session that you attended, and you include your name within that. So that will take everything for you, so you'll be able to access it. Now, let's go one more place. Resources to guide your instruction. One of the things that Michael talked about, Cheryl talked about as well, is that there is the complete assessment guide for GED for educators, and it's broken down into 4 parts. So if you want to go in and really take a look at all of the different indicators that are there, the assessment targets, all you got to do is download it, and you have that for your nice weekend reading. The other thing that we do have here is skills students need to pass. This assessment target comparison chart is available for you here. You will have that as well. Performance level descriptors, all of that information is available. And under free classroom materials, you also can see the study guides, reference sheets, notice English and Spanish. And then there's more information that's included here. There's some guides for other types of things that you can do. So keep that in mind. But again, go to educators and administrators, look at those top resources. Debbie?
Yes, I'm sorry. I realized I was typing away and you probably heard that. I don't see any other questions, but we did have an additional question. Someone has said that they had a student ask if employers don't value a GED test taken in Spanish as favorably as taken in English. Have you heard this? And my answer is no, we have not. And the reason that's not an issue, most employers want to see a copy of the certificate that you earned showing your high school graduation status. Some states offer a certificate, some states offer a diploma. The certificates rarely list a language, and the states determine what their certificate or diploma looks like. And I don't know of any that post the language on there, so it's not visible. The only place that the language is found is on the transcript, if they share their transcript. But the most important thing is that the credential is earned, not the language. So we do not have any information to show that a test taken in Spanish is not viewed as favorably. I would say that is not true. The value is in earning the credential. And other than that,
Okay, we do have
go
a
ahead.
question that came in about the invitations. The newsletter, okay. Jamie, could you send a note to help@ged.com and just let them know that you normally receive the newsletters, but for some reason you have not been getting that recently? Because they need to be aware if there's some problems within that, because we definitely want to make sure that you are with us for the next session and that you're receiving in session as well. So thank you for letting us know that there is a question that's there.
And one last question that is something that I'd like for you to reach out to us directly on. Someone is saying, what do we do if a student is given a different calculator at the testing site? That is an issue that we need to be made aware of, because there is no other type of calculator that is approved to be used at a testing site. That is a Pearson VUE contractual issue, and for us also. So Krista, if you would email us, we would like to work to correct that if something is being done incorrectly. It's not a gotcha. We just want to get with the test center and make sure we help them get on the right track. Okay?
I will also add that the calculator is embedded within the test itself.
Yes.
And we use this, so regardless of what calculator they're given, or if they're not given a calculator, they have access to one in the test itself. And it's the same calculator for math, social studies, and science. And the model escapes me at the moment, but
Right.
we don't obviously need the charts.
Right. Social studies and science, if it's a calculator item, it won't appear on every single science and social studies item. The calculator will appear
Right.
on calculator items. So
Yes.
it should be there for them if they're given a calculator that they're not familiar with. They then can use the on-screen calculator, like Michael said.
That's great. Well, Susan, I'm going to be quiet on this side because I don't see any other additional questions that we need to answer. And if we've overlooked something, you can email us. But Susan, I'm going to let you close out so nobody has to listen to this voice. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you, Debbie. And very special thank you to Cheryl and also to Michael, because there's a lot of work that has gone into this. You see this PowerPoint at the end, but there's been so much research that has been done to help make these determinations and understand what is happening with our students. That is something that has incredible value for us as educators, and we truly appreciate that. So I want to say thank you to Cheryl and also to Michael, and also we're looking forward to seeing you both again in November. And Debbie, hopefully by then we'll have a normal voice when we come back together for the session in November. But we really appreciate all of you for being here with us today. The materials, as we said, give Tico a couple of days because she has to convert the recording and everything else to make sure this happened, will be posted soon. So having said that, anything from anybody else? If not, then I will hopefully just go one slide over. Oops, I give up on my computer. But you have Debbie's email, you have my email, and you also have help@ged.com. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us and let us know. We thank you so much again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in November. Have a great rest of the day or evening, wherever you might be, and we'll see you in November. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.